Okay, good evening, everyone. You are now attending the panel Work in Progress. We're going to talk about character journey tonight. And I have six of our authors with us. 1, 2, 3, 4, yes. So I'm going to introduce them each very quickly. And then later on, as we start answering questions, they're going to talk to you about their books and the characters that inhabit those books as we talk about this topic. So Genevieve McCluer, just raise your hand. Yeah. Was born in California and grew up in numerous cities across the country. She studied criminal justice in college, but after a few years of that, moved her focus to writing. Her whole life, she's been obsessed with mythology, and she bases her stories in those myths. Her first book with BSB was My Date with a Wendigo, and her latest is A Second Chance at Life, a paranormal romance. Jordan Meadows. Favorite books involve a capable woman falling in love with another woman while they overcome obstacles together. Her first book with bold strokes was released in 2023, yay, Proximity, a YA fantasy romance. Her next will be released tomorrow, and that is Not Just Friends. Morgan Lee Miller started writing at the age of 5. Everybody started writing before kindergarten here in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, when she entertained herself by composing her first few novels all by hand. She majored in journalism and creative writing at Grand Valley State University. Her first book with BSB, All the Worlds Between Us, is a YA coming-of-age romance. Her most recent, The Memories of Marley Rose, an historical romance, was just released in December 2023. All of these most recent works all come from 2023, and they'll all be on sale, and you'll get a link for that later. Jaycie Morrison's first 3 novels, Basic Training of the Heart, Hearts, Orders, and Guarding Hearts, make up the Love and Courage series. Set during World War II, they combine Jaycie's love of the written word and of history. On My Way There, released in 2023, is her third standalone contemporary romance with strokes. Heather O'Malley has been writing stories since the 5th grade, along with adventures too numerous to count, including joining the Army, earning a master's in English, figuring out how to cook, and, oh yes, finding true love. Her first book with BSB, Transitioning Home, was released in 2023. In her most recent, Hands of the Morai, a spec fic adventure, it was also released in 2023. David Pederson has written many short stories and poems and is passionate about mysteries, old movies, and crime novels, and as we've recently come to understand, creating architecture for the interiors of his books. He has written 10 mysteries for BSB, including 2 Lambda Literary finalists, congrats, Dave, in the Detective Heath Barrington series. His most recent, Murder at the Oasis, was released in 2023, and that is in the Private Detective Mason Adler series. So those are our authors this evening. I had sent them a series of questions that we could talk about tonight, and then the first one I'm going to ask them is not on the list. So I'm going to put this out, and anybody can jump in first. And that is, we're supposed to be talking about character journey tonight. So the real question is, what's the difference between character arc and character journey? And I can see everybody looking around. Anybody want to take that first?
Well, I guess I would say, in my opinion, that a character arc is kind of what happens to the character, like the beats that they move through as the book goes. And the character journey is how they develop as a character throughout the book. So a character arc might be the things that they do, and the journey is the changes in their character that happen because of the beats, because of the arc.
Anybody else want to comment? Have thoughts on it?
I think that makes a lot of sense what Jordan said. I mean, I kind of agree with that. The arc takes place within the story, and the character journey can be a longer, more in-depth thing about what happens to that person and how they change.
Yeah, I kind of agree with someone in the comments. I would have said the opposite. Like, the arc kind of by its very nature is going to be more about the change than what happens within the story.
Yeah, I would actually say that I agree with you, Genevieve. I think that and there's no, I mean, one can always argue definitions, and I think that the concept is what we need to kind of think about, since we're all going to be talking about the same thing, when I think about character arc, when you think about an arc, there's a beginning, there's a starting point, and there's an ending point. And when we look at a manuscript and say there's no character arc, it basically means nothing has changed for the character from the beginning to the end. And the character journey are the points along the arc where events happen. And I think if you think about it in that way, that will help you structure your novel. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Does that make intuitive sense if we put it in that way?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that was the question that I didn't give you to begin with, but I think that when we talk about this, so that we're all on the same page, and also the audience is also, and I'm not seeing everybody pretty much is agreeing with that, so I think we're okay. What I would like to do is ask you each to tell us a little bit about your book and how you decided what attributes or character traits to give your main character. And since we were talking about Dave, and he creates scenes before he actually is, or while writing the book, can you show us one?
Sure, hang on.
Yeah.
This is from a previous book that I've done, but let's see. This is one of the bedrooms of one of the characters, and this was one of the kitchens I created.
How does that help you conceive of the character? How does that help you create your character?
I think because it creates their environment. So it helps me to actually feel what they're going through and what they're experiencing. Like, this is where they live. It's not fancy, it's basic, it's down to earth, or it is fancy and it's not basic. So it helps me to relate to the character a lot more as I write them. And it helps with the character as far as moving throughout the set, stage direction, if you will. So it's kind of like theater. So I know that when they come down the stairs, they need to turn left to go into the library. So that just helps me visualize in my mind as I'm writing it.
Okay. How about Jordan? How do you first conceive of your character? What's the first thing that you do when you start thinking about the character you're going to put in your novel?
So for me, I guess I'd say that the first thing that I do usually is have like a opening idea or a basic idea of what I want to write about, and then I come up with a character who I think is a good fit for it. So for my book, Not Just Friends, for example, the one that's coming out tomorrow, I had an idea for how somebody would react to a drunk driving death. And so I came up with the character then to specifically have somebody who could take that as a jumping off point for a journey of self-discovery. So then it all came from that for that. So for me, I'm kind of a pantser, and so my character comes along as I'm going. But that one, I specifically needed a character that could grow from that experience.
So you actually started with an event. You started with something that was going to happen in your book, and then developed a character thinking about who and how they would respond to that. Morgan, did you start out with an event or with a character?
I'm going to talk about Marley Rose. I was trying to think exactly what came first. It's like the chicken and the egg. But I think first with Marley Rose, it was her problem. And her problem was she has a lot of painful memories and she wants to erase them. And so from there, I kind of backtracked and did the backstory, because I think that really explains the mindset she's in, because that's an extreme action to take to erase your memory. So I wanted to develop the backstory and all these events that led to her decision. And that kind of, as I was building that, her personality and the attributes would kind of just pop up at random.
Okay. So again, there was, you started out with a concept and then thought about how the character would fit that concept.
Exactly.
I'm getting a theme here. Genevieve?
It depends a lot on the book. Usually I have an idea for a story and I have an idea for a character. Often they're related, sometimes they're not, but then I just see where it develops from there. Like for my most recent book, A Second Chance at Life, it's a vampire who is currently in prison, and throughout it, is released from prison and all of that. But like that is going to influence a lot. Like the kind of person that would be in that situation is going to be very different from the kind of person who would be in basically any other situation. So I have to draw a lot from that. Also a vampire who would be staying in prison despite having vampiric abilities.
So again,
kind of person.
Again, events of the plot have
Yeah.
shaped the character at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Jaycie, character or plot?
Character, just to be the odd one out. I always start with the person that I kind of see in my mind, and I might, if I am having trouble formulating them totally, use sort of a character diamond where I think of the main qualities that they have on each point, and in the middle is always a flaw. There's got to be something or weakness or something that's different about them than perfect. But I just kind of make up the characters and then I follow them around and see what happens.
Okay. All right. Heather?
With Hands of the Morai, because I come up with the character first, but with Hands of the Morai, oddly enough, it was the aspects of the plot first. I came up with the all-female mercenary group first, and then I was like, well, I need someone to start from scratch with this group. So who would that be? And that led me to creating Ash and her whole journey as a lost sister and all of that.
All right. David, since you write mysteries, are you plot first and then, I know you have an ongoing series, but when you first started your first book, was it the mystery that interested you most, or was it the character?
So my very first book was definitely the mystery that inspired me. I visited a really spooky old house in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And I thought, wow, this setting would be an awesome place for a murder mystery. So I went back and designed my own spooky old house on my CAD program, and then wrote a mystery and created a character to go with it. For the last 3 books, the Mason Adler series, I actually created Mason first. And that character drove the plots.
Okay. So I can't help myself because, we're talking about a character journey. And so we just talked about the very beginning of the book. So can anybody say what is the first point on the character journey, the first scene, the first thing? Does anybody actually know what that scene is? Come on. All right. It's called the inciting incident.
Say that.
Yeah.
Everybody goes, oh yeah, we knew that, but we didn't want to
Oh
say it.
yeah,
Okay.
we're
So-
just checking.
So we just talked about what you thought about first, right? Was it plot? And that's kind of that's a big picture thing, right? And then we talked about the character that goes with the plot. So if I said to you, what's the inciting incident in your book? The inciting incident is the very first moment in your book when something happens to the character to change the course of their everyday life. What would it be?
Well, for me, definitely in Murder at the Oasis, they go on vacation and instead of a relaxing weekend, somebody ends up being killed. So yeah, that's a pretty big change.
And in mysteries, very often the crime is the inciting incident that you may see before you actually even see the first character. And you can do that in romantic intrigue as well. I think that sometimes when you introduce what's going to be the story, and then your character has to react to that, that's the inciting incident. So how about Morgan?
For Marley Rose, I think there's 2 because it's told in past and present tense. So the present would be the first memory she erases. And that first memory she erases is when her mom drops her off at a children's home. And that changes her whole life because then she grows up in the foster care. And yeah, I was going to say something else, but then I lost it. But it would be the first memory and that she erases.
Okay.
And that's her parents.
All right, Jaycie?
Well, in my book, on my way home, on my way there, the first section of it jumps around a lot because Maxine Terrell, the main character, her life is really chaotic right at that moment. So there's the pace of the story kind of matches the chaotic nature of her life. But the very first scene is where she's having sex with this woman that she's had a kind of off and on again relationship with, and she's just realized that this is really not what she wants.
Okay.
So that is her inciting incident, though it's actually,
Okay.
she's going to have to go back in time to figure it out.
Okay, so that's a sense of awareness, of self-awareness, that something in her life that up until that moment is not what she really wants. So that I think of the inciting incident as a right angle turn. We're going along and then something happens and the direction we thought we were going to go in is no longer the direction we're going in. Genevieve, did we get you
And
for
in
this
her
one?
case,
We didn't.
sorry.
Go
That's
ahead.
fine.
Go, Jaycie?
Oh, I was just going to say, in Max's case, I think it has a lot to do with what she's always thought she deserved versus maybe what she's figuring out she could have.
Okay. All right. Genevieve, yours?
In A Second Chance at Life, the inciting incident would be her being moved to a different prison, a minimum security cabin back in Ontario, because she's had the exact same life pretty much for the past 20 some years in max security. And all of a sudden, for reasons that she is at the time completely unaware of, she has been transferred and everything is changing and the way the new prison works is completely different. And it's a lot of changes for her.
Okay. All right. That's perfect. Heather?
With Ash, the inciting incident actually occurs off screen. They get beat up by their father for being who they are, and so they decide to run away to join this order that called the Hands, and that is what leads them to take this entire journey, is basically being beaten up.
Okay. So a traumatic incident, something that basically forces them into a different place.
Yes.
An escape. Okay. Jordan?
So I would say that for Jen, it's that she decides that she no longer wants to go to the parties that she's been going to in order to stay friends. So it's a self-awareness thing. She has a moment of just realizing that the life that she's been living isn't what she wants. But that triggers a bigger incident, which is that her friend ends up dying in a drunk driving accident, and then how she copes with that. So
Okay. I think that what everyone has talked about is something that happens to the character that shakes up their world. And I think that what's so important about that at the beginning of the book is that's also what draws in the reader, that inciting incident that intrigues us, that tells us something different is coming and what is going to happen to this character now and where are they going. That's why it's so important early in the book that's actually the very first turning point in the book, is the first inciting incident. It usually will occur very quickly in the first couple of chapters. Sometimes it happens immediately if you start the book in the middle of action. So I think that's why that's one of the pivotal points in the character journey, is that very first moment when they actually take that first step on their journey. So once we've got our characters, we've got our stage. David's already built the stage. We got the stage, we put the characters on it, and we've started them walking down their journey. The next thing we're going to talk about is GMC. Anybody got what that is?
Okay. General Motors Corporation.
Very good. Also known as goal, motivation, and conflict. You'll see a lot about this if you read about creating character. And those tend to be the drivers for the character going forward. That's their journey. And if you're writing a romance, forgive me for the non-romance readers and writers in the audience, but the goal, motivation, conflict is very important because it's often at odds with the goals and the motivation and the conflicts for the other character. So it's important to be able to conceptualize in your mind, what does this person want in their life and why do they want it? And what are the things that are going to make it hard for them to get it? That's the goal, the motivation, and the conflict. If you happen to be writing a mystery, well, the goal is, we got to find out who did it. We want to find out who did it because of, and what are the things that are going to make it hard to do. If you're writing a journey of self-discovery, then you're going to have to deal with, why does this character want to or not want to find out something? So I think that early on, that's kind of something you need to think about in your character. And that's another point in the character journey. And it's also one of the critical aspects of character creation. So, Morgan, what does your character want and why does she want it in her life, in her journey?
She wants two things. She wants her love interest, but the love interest and her got into a big argument before the movie, or not before the movie, before the book. And she doesn't think that she will ever get the love interest. And then the other thing she wants is just happiness and to live the rest of her days just happy, since her life growing up was very tumultuous. So, and what's getting in the way of her happiness are these memories of heartbreak, grief, abandonment, and that's why she chooses to do this memory erasure.
Okay. All right, Jordan.
So Jen, what she really wants is to belong and also to know herself. She goes into the book just really not having either of those things. And getting in the way of that is partly it's knowledge and partly it's absolutely herself getting in her own way, because for her, she had some rejections in middle school, and the way that she was coping with that was by just withdrawing from basically all of life. So she has to figure out how to reconnect with people again, and then also a huge part of it is her and one of the obstacles to that is a father who's not accepting, and getting to know herself, just who she is, and part of that is education for her. She gets taken along to a stealth LGBTQ plus club, and at first she thinks she's just the token ally, and then she starts to learn more about herself, and so that's her journey.
Okay, so for her, there's a lot of introspection.
Yes.
And a lot of her goals have to become externalized as she moves through this.
Okay. Yes, absolutely.
All right, Genevieve?
Well, Dina wants to be with the woman she loves again, and she wants to basically be able to have a life again. And the main things keeping her from it are, one, her tendency to fall on every single sword she sees, as she's so self-sacrificing that she basically chose to be in prison for 25 years and pushed away her then girlfriend, and that she now has absolutely no idea how to function in the world, how to, even really connect to the woman she loved. It's a lot of lost time that she has to make up for.
I love characters who want to fall on their sword. So I would ask you, what motivates her to do that? What in her past or what in her character motivates her to fall on her sword?
I mean, a lot of it's just that she was self-sacrificing and was certainly raised that way, but plenty of it was, at the time, she felt like she had to take it to save Rachel, her partner, and just had to keep going from there, and didn't really realize that there are alternatives and just kept compounding on them.
Okay. All right. I think that's why it's important to really look at the motivation behind goals, because that will help you, I think, look at your character in greater depth and allow you to actually add dimension to your character. It's not just what they want, but why they want it. And very often why they want it comes from the backstory, which you were talking about, Morgan.
Yeah.
So I think that's how you work that concept of goal, motivation, and conflict into your character development. Heather, how about your character? What do they want and what motivates them?
Ash initially wants to get the hell out of her little tiny village.
Okay.
It's it they don't see life happening there or being anything of any use, and so all they want, whether they can join the group, the Hands, or not, they just want to get out, and so their only motivation is just escape. And it's when they get another incident that changes things that their motivation changes from escape from a bad situation to I need to repay something.
I think that's a really good point, and that's actually another point in terms of character journey. When a character's goal changes, and that's a big part of the arc that we were talking about from the beginning, when they say, oh, the character has no arc, or the character does have an arc. At the beginning, what we think we want not what we may want in the greater scheme of things, in the greater picture, particularly in a romance. When you're writing a romance, the character often thinks that they are perfectly fine on their own. They don't need to be in a relationship, for example. And at some point along their journey, that goal begins to change. So I think that that's a really good example of that's what she wants now, but something happens in the book on their journey, a scene that changes, and that may be your next turning point. Jaycie, how about you? Where do we start?
Yeah, you really just kind of nailed what I was going to say. Max thinks that what she wants is to be with this other woman, Daphne, who is really intrinsic to her childhood trauma. But later she realizes that she really deserves more than what Daphne can give. So she has to take a kind of a journey of self introspection to figure that out. But yeah, that's a lot of her journey.
Okay. So I wanted to ask David, how important is the individuality of your main character in writing in your genre? In other words, will any detective do? We all kind of have an idea of what a private detective does, or, how important is the individual to the story, or is your individual to the story?
Yeah, I think especially in the last three books, the Mason Adler books, I think the character is very important. Mason Adler is a unique character. He's older, so he's in his 50s, and he's not one of these young, fresh out of the school detectives. So he's a little bit older. He's more mature. He's single. He's not necessarily looking for a relationship. He enjoys his flirtations and his one night stands when they come along. He enjoys being free. He likes his friendships, and he likes solving mysteries. He's a private detective as opposed to the police detective in the first 7 books. So I always try to throw in a little romance. So it's interesting when you're talking about that he's not necessarily looking for love, but in Murder at the Oasis, he actually ends up, in the process of solving the murders, he also meets up with a police detective in Palm Springs, and the two of them have a flirtation that the reader is left to believe may end up going into a romance. So the character of Mason is definitely specifically written for these books and his interaction with the other characters. I think if I'd written a different character or just plugged in any particular private eye, it wouldn't play off as well with the characters in the story that I developed.
Yeah, I think it's really important, no matter what genre we write. And we all have genre expectations of a sci-fi fantasy or a space opera or a romance or a mystery, that the character have a unique draw for the reader, because that adds a dimension that is going to stay with the reader and it's going to interest them, because there are lots of mysteries out there. But when you've got a really unique character, I think of Kinsey Milhone. How many of those were there? 26 plus. And yet she never became a caricature, and she always had issues. And I think that what you were talking about, adding the romance, I think I'm a big Lee Childs fan, and Jack Reacher always has a relationship. And they managed to not make him be a womanizer, but it humanizes him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what you're saying. And that really is a real draw for the reader, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
All right. So we've made it actually through the first 25% of the book in terms of the character journey. So the first 25% of your book is basically where you introduce your character, where you bring in your secondary characters, you put everybody on the stage, you give them their challenge, whatever it is, to escape from this horrible place, to deal with being in prison, to look at their life and their relationship that isn't going to work, to respond to this traumatic incident. And you've got a character who is now dealing with that, and you've got this other character over here who is basically in balancing two different time frames and memories. And that should bring you to the first 25%. And the second 50% of your book is where all the good stuff happens. And that's where all the events happen in your character journey, which is going to move them along towards the end. So what do I have for you here? Do you outline these things that are going to happen to your character as the book progresses? Morgan, how do you decide what you're going to write?
I try my best to outline. I try really hard, and sometimes I stop. I always try to outline when I have the story idea, but for Marley Rose, I had to. I had to keep track of the memories she keeps and the memories she erases, because that's going to play a whole part to the narrative. And she slowly turns into an unreliable narrator. So I had no other choice but to force myself to be a plotter for Marley Rose. But when I'm having a hard time kind of figuring out what's going to happen in the middle, because I find it easy to do the first 25% of the book. It's just the rest that makes my mind go crazy. But when I'm really stuck, that's when I do force myself to break down those plot points and write them out. Other times, other books, that it comes easy and I can just type and not really plot. But with Marley Rose, yeah, I had to really plot and outline.
Okay. All right. David?
Well, just the very nature of writing mysteries, I kind of have to be a plotter. So I have to know who's going to be killed and how they're going to be killed and why they're going to be killed, who's going to kill them, and what kind of clues are going to be left for the detective to discover. So I definitely start with an outline, but like she said, I also often veer from it as the story evolves. And in addition to the outline, I also try to create character biographies. So in that, I list all the little details about each character, each person, what their hair color is, what their eye color is, what they like, what they don't like. I don't always use it in all of the books, but again, just like creating their environment with the CAD program, creating their biographies helps me to visualize what kind of a person they are, and helps me get inside their head. And then within the biographies, I often chart the story of the main characters and where they came from, what their backstory is, etc. So.
Okay. Does anybody else do that? Do extensive personality profiles when you start drafting character? Morgan saying yes.
I do, yeah.
All right. How often does that change as you're moving along through the story?
How often does
it change? Oh,
how often does how you conceive of them at the beginning change as you write the book?
For me, it depends on the character. I wrote the character of Walter Wingate, which is in all three of the Mason Adler books. Originally, he was only going to be in the first book, and he was written as rather despicable and not very likable. And I found out that he was such an interesting character that I brought him back in the next two books and gave him a nice backstory and softened him and gave him some reasons as to why he behaves the way he does. And so he definitely changed. So yeah, it varies.
Morgan, how about you? Did your character profile?
It kind of varies. Most of the time, like the main essence of the character stays the same. And it's mostly like little details. I'm really bad at like keeping track of eye color. So I, again, had to force myself to write these down. I think Barbara Ann Wright was like, wait, the eye color changed midway through. I'm like, oh no. But it's really like those little things that kind of change throughout, but the big overarching character usually stays the same.
All right. Heather, how about you? Do you plot or do you, are you a pantster?
I'm much more of a pantster. And in fact, in Hands of the Morai, one of the things that really threw me is I'm like 40 pages in and the story's not going anywhere. And I'm like, this is boring. I don't want to write it, let alone anyone read it. And so it's like, what's missing? What's missing? And that's when a secondary sort of primary character of the Raven, who takes part in all these adventures and is a character all on their own, and you get a whole arc with that character, showed up and changed everything. And I was like, where did this bird come from? I had no idea, but that bird made a huge difference in the story, and it made Ash an even deeper, richer character because had this pre-existing relationship with this friend, and I was just like, okay, I can do this. And then the rest of the story just flowed from there.
That's the exciting thing about writing. I mean, I think that's the creative process that happens. I bet everybody up here would say that happens at some point. I remember when I was writing one of my very early ones, and the character was driving home. It was very early in the book. The character was driving home, and I realized that her twin was waiting for her in the house, and that changed the whole story. And so, that's the part that's creative and fun. Genevieve, plotter or pantster?
I pretty much always pants about the first 25% of the book, like you were saying, and then from there I try to have a very detailed outline, because at that point I know enough about the characters, the world, the story, in addition to the plans I'd already had, that everything can pretty much be put into place. And then the rest of the book I have, pretty much every single scene planned out, most of the major interactions. A few things will change, but for the most part, the style completely changes there.
I wish I could do that. I don't do that either. I pants completely. How about Jordan? How about you?
I'm a big pantster. I sit down and I like to just kind of see what's going to happen to learn along as I go. Sometimes that means that I have to write a lot extra, I think, though, instead of somebody who plans it all out, because I'll sometimes get to a point where I've gone down a path for thousands of words and I'm like, this isn't working. Like it's not going any place that I want it to go. And so I have to figure out where things veered off into a direction that wasn't working and hit it back from there. Lately, though, I will say that I have been doing something similar where I get to maybe 20, 30,000 words. And then I'm like, okay, now I really kind of need to know what's going to happen for the rest of the book. And so I will do some planning at that point. And I don't always stick to the plan that I've made from there, but yeah, it's right around there that I decide usually that I need to
30,000 have. How long are your novels usually? 70?
Yeah, around there.
25%. That's the turning point. It's the middle 50% where we all struggle. Unless you're
exactly.
Unless you're writing a mystery and you know every single scene.
Not even then.
How about you? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a total pantser too. I think in a way it helps me feel more authentic about what I'm writing if I'm in the character's head and just following their journey, not really knowing necessarily where it's going to go. Just like in real life, we don't always know where we're going to go. So I kind of enjoy that part of it. I tried to be more plottish in what I'm working on now, and it's not helping. So I may go back to the other way.
All right. I want to get back to the character journey because we're about halfway through the book, I think, by now. Because you all have got everything down on the stage and you know where you're going, and now you're actually plotting. So the second major turning point in story structure, anybody want to take a shot at where that falls in the book?
Midpoint.
Yes, 50% mark. So when you think about the character journey and you think about your story structure, at the 50% mark, there's a tent pole. There's a big turning point, and that you should be writing towards a big scene in the middle of your book. That if you keep that in your mind and you write towards that point, it will help you drive your plot forward. So, can you all think of whether you have a major point in the middle of your book? Morgan is shaking her head. Yes, what is it?
It's when Marley finally gets with her love interest, Elle.
Okay. All right. So it may be an intimate scene. It may be a sex scene.
Yeah.
Jordan?
Yeah, for sure. It's when Jen realizes that she's asexual.
All right. So it's a moment of self-discovery.
Mhm.
A big moment of self-discovery. And the point of a turning point, again, is it will move your story in a different direction. So we'll get back to that. Jaycie, do you have a 50% big scene?
I think so. I think it's when the first time that Max doesn't do what Daphne wants her to do, and ends up going instead to see the woman that is ultimately going to be her real love interest.
All right, so she moves forward in her intimate relationship. That's going to take
She
her.
moves away from.
Okay.
Yeah, she moves away from the relationship that hasn't been functioning the way she wants it to.
Okay.
It may be intimate, but it's not what she wants, or she's not going to get what she wants. So then she has a chance to go see someone else that she's met, and she decides to do that rather than staying with the other woman.
Okay. Genevieve?
Yeah, the big scene
Get out of
at
prison?
Yes, actually, getting out of prison and having just married the
Excellent.
woman she loves, while neither of them are even slightly ready to be at that point in their relationship. But it was kind of necessary to be able to get out on parole because you have to be released into somebody's custody.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it takes the story and their relationship in a different direction.
Yeah.
Heather?
There is a discovery that the people who've been funding the bandits and slavers is actually a enemy to the hands of the Morai specifically, and to their goddess, and so it changes what was just simple bandit hunts to, oh God, this is so much larger. We need to get more people involved, and
Expands the canvas of the work.
yes.
Okay. David, midpoint, somebody else get killed?
How did you know?
That's what I would do. If I don't know what to do, I shoot somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So roughly halfway through the book, they discover another body. Somebody else gets bumped off, and of course, the police detective that ends up being a romantic interest for Mason comes back to the scene, and of course, that also leads to complications and interests and changes his way of thinking. And so, yeah, 2 murders, 1 love.
Okay. All right, we got time to end with the third major turning point, which is also, anybody want to name it?
The crisis.
Yes, the crisis moment. Okay, so this should hit about 75%, maybe, right about there. So do we have another big event that happens right about there? And what I'm trying to get at is all of this is a character's journey follows in lockstep with the story structure. And if you can think about it that way, it will help you, I think, drive your novel, so that your novel and your character, your action and all of your scenes move together through the story, and your character progresses along that journey until they get to the end of their arc. So Heather, anything, what would you say is the crisis moment when the character is all is lost, or thinks all is lost, or is pushed into a position where all may be lost?
That actually happens a little bit past 75%
Okay,
of the
that's
book.
fair. It can be.
It's this big climactic moment. Her love interest has been knocked out. She is now weaponless in front of the major bad guy, and the major bad guy is not who they had thought it was. And she's just like, and so
Okay.
she's kind of stuck in this point, and manages to get her way out of it.
So it's a big reveal and it's an action scene.
Yes.
Okay. That's it often happens in space operas too, when there's a big,
And it's all tied up with her romantic interest and all of that. So it's all facets brought together at once.
David?
Yeah, actually, mine is very similar to Heather's. So it's when Mason confronts the suspect or suspects, as the case may be, and the love interest, the police detective, is right there by his side. And at one point, the suspects get the upper hand, and things look a little bleak.
Okay. All right. Jordan?
Yeah, so Jen and her romantic interest are together, and somebody that Jen thought that she was building a bond with absolutely rejects her, and just she falls apart again, and then has to rebuild from there. So
Okay. So an emotional withdrawal, it's frequently in a romance, in which also happens in a romance, is an emotional or an intimate withdrawal, but something that basically the character had moved past their fear or uncertainty to this point, and then all of a sudden it falls apart. Morgan?
exactly.
So I have two because of the dual timelines. One is someone really passes away, not the love interest, but someone else. And then in the present, Marley realizes that she really regrets this whole procedure. And she has to tell her Elle, the love interest, and her son that she's erasing the memories. And obviously that does not go over well.
Okay. So again, there's, for her, it's an upheaval of everything that's happened up until that moment.
Correct.
Right. Jaycie?
Yeah, I think mine happens when the two women in Max's life meet. Not in a good way, not like at a party or something. And each of them realizes that Max has not been totally honest with them about, which is kind of one of Max's flaws, about the relationship with each. And so there's everything just sort of blows up in her face.
Okay. All right. So I think we've taken it to the final moment in the book, which is basically when all the conflict is resolved. Do any of you have anything you want to add to the concept of working with the character, or questions? Or I'm going to hit you with one last.
I didn't get to do mine.
Oh, please, Genevieve. Yes. We got him
Okay,
on a first. Thank God.
Yeah, mine is when someone tries to murder both of them, and they find that their sense of morality is very different from, having been a lot more similar years ago, and that there's someone who's been framing Dina for murder to try to get her sent back to prison.
All right. So again, that's a crisis moment that then's going to require another moment after that where the character has to change again.
Yes.
All right. So 30 seconds. What is the epiphany for your character? What is the thing they come to realize at the end of the book that they didn't know at the beginning? Anybody got it?
For me, that's easy. He discovers who really killed the people and why they killed them, and he solves the mystery and gets the phone number of the hack guy.
Okay, I mean, justice is served. That should be the end.
Yes.
Morgan?
Marley realizes that she really does need these memories, and that they make her who she is, and she may or may not get them back. Spoiler.
Okay. Heather?
Ash finds that her strength is beyond what she thought and what the goddess knew she had in her all along.
All right, she finds out something about self-discovery. Genevieve?
Yeah.
Realizes who was framing her for murder, finds that being a vampire doesn't really have to make her evil, that she actually really likes being an actress, and that maybe that her and her partner have changed a whole bunch, but they both seem to actually be willing to put in the effort by this point.
Okay. Jordan?
So Jen accepts herself for who she is and has a circle of people around her who also accept her for who she is.
Jaycie?
I think Max realizes who she needs to be and what kind of love she could have, what she deserves to have.
Okay. So basically the arc is where we started and where you end at the epiphany. So they start with a sense of themselves and a goal, and they end up at the epiphany, and all the points, those turning points and those big scenes in between, that's the character journey. And you guys just took us through it for every book. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Red.
You.
Yeah.